Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The political standoff over spending cuts and taxes as the state's Democratic convention kicks off. Proposition 8 sponsors want federal Judge Von Walker's ruling thrown out, citing a conflict of interest due to his sexual orientation. Apple addresses privacy concerns over tracking files in phones and other mobile devices. And the controversy over bringing the ROTC back to Stanford University. All coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me now on our news panel are Troy Wolverton, personal technology columnist for the San Jose Mercury News; Bobby Gelko, legal reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle; and Carla Marinucci, senior political writer, also with the Chronicle. Carla, the state's Democratic leadership is assembling. These are guys that should be happy tonight, but with the state where it is, what are the many concerns that will be discussed?
Yeah, the Democrats meeting this weekend in Sacramento. And you're right, Belva, they have a lot to be happy about in California. Look, they have every statewide office. They have a voter advantage of more than 2 million in California. I mean, this is a party that should be celebrating a lot, except there's a little hang up for their governor, Jerry Brown. He needs just a handful of Republican votes to get him those budget proposals in front of the voters of California, and it has not happened. And I think this weekend we're going to see some drama up there. All of the statewide elected officials are going to be there. Kamala Harris, the Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, and Dianne Feinstein is going to give the main address on Saturday. But the party is going to be hearing from Brown on Sunday, and I think Brown is going to have to give them some tough love and say, look, we have to come to some agreement with the Republicans, and you all are going to have to give up a little more than you want. And there's a lot of concern in the Democratic ranks, the labor people, when we're talking about pensions, and already we're seeing ads from the California Teachers Association up on TV talking about do not cut education anymore. He's getting pressure from those groups, and he will get it there, and we're going to see what kind of address he delivers and how tough he gets to them this weekend, because we have begun to hear sort of what is the Democratic strategy going forward, or how they're starting to pressure the Republicans. Both Bill Lockyer and the Senate leader Darrell Steinberg this week talked about, well, maybe we can do some outsized cuts in the Republican districts. That is, if the Republicans are so opposed to tax increases or tax extensions, well, maybe their districts can be the ones to get cut back on in public services. And we're hearing that argument sort of being floated, and of course the Republicans are starting to already
Is that
protest.
legal? Could they do that? Could they say, oh, Orange County, you're not going to get as much as Alameda County?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure, to be honest, but I think, you know, all of these legislators are saying enough already with this discussion. That is, if you Republicans really want less government, let's have less government in your districts. And, you know, the Republicans are going to have to come back. I mean, Brown had 2 polls this week that had some good news for him. That is, the polls showed that people do want, by a 60% margin, do want this proposal on the ballot so they can weigh in on it.
A proposal to?
He's proposed a combination of cuts which have already been made and 5 years of tax extensions, vehicle license, sales tax, and personal tax. And the Republicans have just opposed those tax extensions, and many of them have signed no new tax pledges, and they say they will never go for it. But the fact is, I did see the governor in the Silicon Valley this week. He has the approval of business groups all around the state, and they want to see this go forward too. So the Republicans are getting pressure, but Brown now needs to make his case to his base up in Sacramento this weekend.
Well, we've heard this. You know, ever since Brown got in office. Well, he's going to pressure the Republicans. He's going to go meet with the businesses. He's going to meet with the sheriffs. He's going to meet with whoever. The Republicans don't budge. Meantime, the polls, at least the ones that I saw, seem to say there's maybe less of an attraction to voting on taxes that we are going to pay. Now there seems to be a mood of tax the rich. I mean, you probably saw the same thing. Any thoughts in the Democratic Party or any of their allies to put that before the voters?
Yeah, I think this is where it's going to be interesting to see how much pressure Brown gets, because there's absolutely a feeling among base Democrats that this is where Brown should go, that there is the public support for increasing taxes on the wealthiest Californians. Republicans are fighting that one tooth and nail. Many Democrats also want to see taxes on oil, more taxes on corporations. The Republicans are fighting that, saying that would hurt economic recovery in California. And Brown has tried to, be right down the middle and try to appeal to both sides on this, and he really has done an awful lot of lobbying work among the Republicans.
Seems to have no leverage with them, though. I mean, is there any sign?
I'm not sure. I think I sense something is moving there, because in Silicon Valley this week, he still seems very hopeful that something's going to happen, and he's getting these big business groups behind him, who the Republicans are listening to. When you have a group like the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, with 350 CEOs in Silicon Valley, that's not a group you want to just ignore.
Given the sentiment that you're starting to hear from Democrats about, let's tax the rich, let's not do these cuts, how much flexibility is the Democratic Party, the Democratic rank and file, going to give Brown to allow him to have the flexibility to meet the demands of these two Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question, and the flexibility, particularly on the issue of pension reform, because that's where Brown is facing the most pressure from Republicans, and he'll be facing it up there among the Democrats, who are going to fight that. Any efforts to cut back pensions or give backs or anything. We saw Brown get an awful lot of heat this last couple of weeks on the prison guards, 30,000 member prison guard union, and a deal, or at least a proposal for a deal made there. So he's really between a rock and a hard place on this, and I think that's the drama going forward. How does he handle all these groups?
Well, I guess if there's anything that's coming out of this, that it doesn't really matter much if you're a majority. If you have an opposition that is solidly stands together as a minority. Well, we also have a new development in another case we thought was sort of on the way settled, on its way probably to the Supreme Court, and that is Proposition 8, which was the initiative that banned gay marriages. This week, a new charge against the judge who wrote the decision to overturn Proposition 8?
Yeah, and the charge the sponsors of Proposition 8 insist is not that Vaughn Walker is gay and therefore had a built-in bias. They say, no, we're not saying that a gay or lesbian couldn't judge this fairly. It's that he has a partner, a longtime partner, a 10-year partner, and maybe they'll get married, and that gives him a stake in the case. At least he hasn't disavowed it, and he just, kind of confirmed that in a meeting with us in the press.
Not that he was planning to get married.
No, I'm sorry. Not that he had a partner. After he left the bench at the end of February, he met with the press and felt a little freer to talk about the case than when he was a judge. And the question about his sexual orientation and his partner came up. Fairly well known, but never really out of his mouth. So the proponents of Proposition 8 say, all we had before was, rumor and speculation. Hell, my own newspaper was the first source of it. But nevertheless, now he's gone public. He should have said it before. He should have disclosed it, and this at least would have allowed us to make a timely challenge.
What was it about it that said he should have just, unless he was planning and knew in his heart he was going to get married?
Their argument was that the potential that he would marry his partner is something that they should have been able to know in advance, so they could decide whether or not to challenge it. Because this is something that, in the language of the law, a reasonable person might consider as evidence of appearance of partiality, not bias, but the appearance of it. And that should be enough. And of course, that's what they filed. That's now going to go before Judge Walker's successor as Chief Judge, James Ware, who will hear it in June.
But Bob, under this argument, I guess, it seems to me if you take it to its logical extension, only an unmarried, asexual judge is qualified. I mean, who's qualified? If you could take this to any number of cases. Is an African American qualified to listen to civil rights cases? Is a woman, etc.
How far does it go? Well, change the facts some. Let's just say Judge Walker, which he has not said, intended to marry his partner, or had tried to, or had a marriage license application pending. I mean, everybody pays taxes. That doesn't mean the judges, can't vote on it. But suppose there's a narrow tax that applies only to a few judges, or suppose you're, undisclosed personal friendship with, let's say, the vice president or something like that. Not to name any names. If you change the facts enough, it might be a specific enough possibility.
But in this case, for instance, isn't a heterosexual married judge equally disqualified under this argument?
It could be, because the premise of Proposition 8 was that allowing gays and lesbians to marry weakened heterosexual marriage and affected the children. You could certainly make the argument that on the other hand, that applies to everybody. And the notion of a conflict is it's got to be fairly narrow and apply to you specifically. That financial conflict, that friendship, that marriage license application, which no one seems to have found any evidence that exists. And I should say that the legal commentators who have been quoted so far don't seem to set too much stock either in the notion of a conflict or the idea that they couldn't have raised this earlier. Why just raise it after you've lost the case? It kind of sounds like sour grapes. We don't know how Judge Ware will feel about this. He's an unknown quantity on the issue, but he's going to have to judge a fellow judge, and might be pretty tough to say that he had that conflict.
I was going to ask that. How are the courts likely to look on this? I mean, it seems to me that there's kind of an institutional bias on the part of the court not to overrule another judge on whether or not he thinks he has a conflict.
I think that's right, and I think the odds are against the judges at this level saying anything like that. That said, perhaps this is aimed at the big bench in Washington, where the case is ultimately heading. Right now it's in the Ninth Circuit on the merits of Judge Walker's ruling. And it could be that they're simply trying to lobby the Supreme Court in advance that, besides everything else in the case, we had a biased judge. They've already overruled Judge Walker on the question of televising the trial. Could be that this is just intended to send a message.
And let's just say Judge Walker ended up in that position because of the lottery effect.
Yeah, which he did.
On a computer. And so now we have Judge James Ware, who's an African American.
Right.
He also ended up in that same position because of that? Is that how
he drew the cases because he's succeeding Judge Walker as chief, and he was assigned all of Judge Walker's cases. But Walker himself drew the case by random draw at the start, like all these cases are assigned, and it just was happenstance. And now, months and months after the ruling, it's being challenged on the grounds of bias. I should mention also that the same Prop 8 proponents are arguing that Judge Walker illegally took videos of the trial, and they're trying to get those confiscated from him as well. Okay,
there seems to be no confusion, Troy, about your story, that Apple has done something that a lot of people are upset about, and that's the little tracking file inside of your iPhone.
Right.
And other devices too, I assume.
Right. So, yes, there was a big controversy that sprang up last week when two researchers at a conference in Santa Clara announced that they discovered this file on the iPhone, which appears to keep track of where that iPhone has been over time. It turns out, and the bigger kind of controversy about this is that people in the forensics field, people that dig into the digital files that are on hard drives and on mobile phones, had actually known about this for about a year. And they actually had been using this file for quite a long time in legal cases, criminal matters and others. There is a little bit of confusion and controversy over what this file was actually doing. Apple took a week to address some of the concerns. They came out this week and said that the file was basically a bug. It was unintended, that it was collecting more data than it should have been collecting, and that that they're going to give users a way of not turning it on and not backing it up onto their computers.
Wait a minute, a bug unintended apple? That doesn't
And
sound
it's being used by attorneys in criminal cases.
Yeah. I mean, but my question is, how specific is the location? I mean, does it know we're in the KQED headquarters? I mean, does my iPhone know exactly where I am? And can it pinpoint? How specifically could it pinpoint where we are?
So this file was not particularly precise. And one of the things that Apple noted in its statement was that it often had information about cell towers that were 50 or 100 miles from where people are. However, the forensics researchers that I've talked to and the folks that were speaking at this conference said, the data could be used to locate people and give you a kind of general idea of where people are. It's not extraordinarily precise, but, within say several miles or several hundred meters, probably you could figure out where people were. And certainly that's the way it's been used in legal investigations, is to say, yes, a person was in this particular area, or no, they weren't in this particular area.
So what's the lesson here? That the more modern conveniences we get, the more technological wizardry we use to make our lives, brighter or more connected to each other, the more we're really inviting some people we may not know to look over our shoulder?
Well, I think there's something to that. I mean, there's no evidence that I've seen so far that other phones are keeping this kind of log, this long-standing log. I mean, that was one of the objections to this file, was that it could contain data as much as a year old. There's no evidence so far that any other phone has this kind of log on it. But it is well known, and is becoming more known, that location data is being kept by all kinds of people. The wireless carriers have this information. The Apple and Google say they do have this information, although they try to keep it anonymous. They say they keep it anonymous. And application providers have this information. Application providers and now mobile marketers that they work with. Many of the applications that are on your phone are free. And
so how did Facebook get wrapped into this whole debate?
Well, Facebook has been, they weren't wrapped up in this debate precisely,
yes.
But Facebook has obviously had lots of privacy questions surrounding it, and it's kind of something similar in the sense that people are sharing more and more information. And the issues are similar in that people may be sharing information but not realizing how much information they're sharing and who has access to that information. And so that they're sharing information unintentionally. People in the privacy community talk about informed consent, and they would say that in many cases users aren't getting informed consent or aren't giving informed consent.
Okay, so if the phone knows where we're at, what else does it know about us?
Oh gosh, well, each phone has a unique identifier, so that particular phone is unique in the world. And so you can tie a unique identifier to the location, so you know precisely where a precise phone has been. In many cases, you're using services where they know things about you, like you might have a Facebook app on your phone. Well, Facebook knows who you are, it knows where you live, knows your phone number. So that type of information can all be tied together.
Well, as the personal computer technology columnist here, you probably knew that I was going to say it's time for this interesting conversation to move on. But it is interesting. We'd like to have you back again to find out more of what we don't know about.
Oh, dear.
Well, the ROTC, or Reserve Officers Training Corps, was banned from the Stanford University campus during the Vietnam War. But there is a controversial move to bring that program back, as NewsHour's correspondent Spencer Michaels explains in this story.
If students at Stanford want to join the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps, they have to travel 16 miles to attend class at Santa Clara University.
Oh, carry on, carry on.
Stanford, like many private schools, severed ties with ROTC 40 years ago, pushing it off campus, a situation that could be about to change.
If you're going to become an Army officer, you have a type A personality. So you're all leaders.
In the 1960s, with the Vietnam War raging, students and faculty at universities across the country made campus ROTC programs a target of demonstrations and demands. The mood was anti-war and anti-military. At Stanford, the ROTC building was burned down. Ann Thompson is a Stanford senior and a cadet battalion commander in Army ROTC.
I think that a lot of the reasons that it wasn't really popular in the Vietnam era aren't really applicable to the debate today.
The 7 Stanford cadets at Santa Clara get no credit for ROTC classes, but most get their tuition paid, plus a monthly stipend and transportation between campuses. Nationally, nearly 500 ROTC units have crosstown arrangements with nearby universities. But those arrangements disturb Cadet Jimmy Ruck.
By not having it on campus, it's precluded many students from even participating.
You could set up your assaulting team as one entire squad. And you could
one reason Stanford kept military training off campus was the military ban on gays. Then in 1993, Don't Ask, Don't Tell barred openly gay people from military service, including ROTC. Now, with its repeal, though it's still not implemented, the debate has returned. Harvard was the first private university to reverse its policies that kept ROTC off campus. Stanford and several other private colleges are debating the issues. Public universities, for the most part, did not ban ROTC, fearful of losing federal funds. At Stanford, the debate has been intense, but unlike the 60s, polite. It began when former Secretary of Defense William Perry, who now teaches at Stanford, and others, proposed bringing ROTC back into the academic fold.
Having the mixture of the ROTC students with the rest of the students was a good thing, I thought. It was important for the Stanford students to be exposed to the people who are going to be our future military leaders.
With the U.S. military engaged in at least 2 wars, Perry is concerned that students at elite universities have become isolated from the men and women doing the fighting. Barely a handful of Stanford students have enrolled in the military in the last few years.
We want the citizens of the country to have something to say and to participate in their army. And we want not just the citizens from the lower ranks of society, but the citizens who are going to the elite colleges.
Despite a slight rise in college graduates entering the military recently, the numbers remain low, especially at elite schools like Stanford.
We've got a submarine captain who's being court-martialed because he hit a passenger vessel.
History professor Barton Bernstein, here teaching a seminar on nuclear war, was a young anti-war faculty member in the 60s who was active in demonstrations against ROTC and is still fighting against it.
The faculty would presumably be chosen by the Pentagon and not by the university. When I have moral doubts about the presence of ROTC, it's primarily teaching people how not simply to lead, but how to fight and kill.
Education professor Eamon Callan is a member of a faculty committee formed to consider these arguments. He wonders if ROTC limits open inquiry and impinges on academic freedom.
Suppose you have an instructor who's teaching a course in international relations and decides that as a class assignment they will invite students to analyze some documents that have been made available through WikiLeaks. They're still classified documents, and a student in ROTC might jeopardize their future security clearance if they are required to examine one of those documents as a course requirement.
But William Perry is more concerned that the military be able to include in its ranks well-educated Stanford students.
They ought to be leaders, contributing to leaders in our military field as well. It's part of our country, it's part of our democracy.
Professor Bernstein, who was a cadet in the 1950s, says that true leadership is not the kind they teach in ROTC.
Does leadership mean element, column left, column right? Shoulder your rifles, parade rest. If that's leadership, it's not something I think we should be teaching. If it's leadership with critical judgment, they're barred in part because they're not allowed to criticize the commander-in-chief.
Do not debate tactics or techniques with the leader. If you're asked to give input, then give it. If not, don't.
But for an anti-war group putting up posters on campus urging students not to support ROTC, the issue was militarism.
It would change the character of the campus because it would be a U.S. military facility on our campus.
It is in Stanford's interest and it is in this country's interest to put the best into the military, to have them not only educated but also trained here.
Trans rights are human rights!
Like the anti-war students, gay groups on campus also oppose the return of ROTC. They say the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell didn't go far enough, since it still allows discrimination against transgender people. Student Association President Angelina Cardona thinks the military's exclusion of transgender people will play a surprisingly important role in Stanford's decision on ROTC.
I'm personally pro-military. My stepfather is a veteran. I would be thrilled to see the ROTC return to Stanford University if they were willing to meet us halfway and to include all of our students in their organization and in this unique opportunity. However, as it is now, they do not.
The university president will now decide the fate of ROTC at Stanford following last night's full Senate faculty recommendation.
So what's next? Well, University President Hennessy will begin discussions with the U.S. military about reestablishing the program at Stanford. I thank all of you here for joining us tonight, and I thank you also. That's all we have for tonight. You can find us online anytime at kqed.org/thisweek to catch up on past episodes and segments, to sign up for our newsletter and podcast, and to share your thoughts about the program. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.